The construction of this sweater is just going to be 2 panels and 2 sleeves. So we'll first start with the panels. So before we get started on making these panels, you guys are going to need to know 2 measurements. The first measurement is how wide you want your panels to be, and the second measurement is how tall you want them to be, how long you want your sweater to be. So to take the first measurement, what I did was I found a sweater of my own that I liked the fit of. I laid it down on a flat surface and I measured it from seam to seam. So once I got that measurement, that was going to be how wide I wanted to make my panels for this sweater. Then for the second measurement, all you're going to do is measure from the top of your shoulder all the way down to however long you want your sweater to be. So the first measurement for me was 18 inches wide, and the second measurement for me was 18.5 to 19 inches tall. So once you have those 2 measurements, come on back and let's get started on making the first panel. To get started with the first panel, grab whatever color you like. I would recommend grabbing one of the 2 colors that you are not going to use for the ribbing, just so that, I don't know, it looks better in the end. But grab whatever color you like, start off with a slip knot, and then what you're going to do is make a chain so that it stretches to the first measurement you took. So that's going to be however wide you want your panels to be. And for me, that's going to be a total of 60 chains. So that is my chain 60. Now, as you can see, I have my finished first panel right here. Now, the chain that I made for this first panel is the exact same amount of chains that I just made right here. And you can see the difference in how the project has grown. So that is why I always recommend for your foundation chain, you want to stretch it to your desired measurement. So you see it was normally about 15 inches long, but when I stretched it, it reached 18 inches, which is what my measurement one was. So that is the reason I tell you guys to stretch your foundation chain. It's because projects tend to grow. I don't know if it's just me or if this happens to you too, but you can kind of tell based on your previous projects if your foundation chains kind of stay the same, length the whole entirety of your project, or if they also tend to grow. That's just what I've found, so that's just a little comparison for you guys and a reasoning as to why I tell you to stretch your foundation chain to what you want your end result to be, so measurement 1. So let's just get right into row 1 now. For row 1, you're first going to want to chain up 1 more, and then starting in the second chain from the hook, you're going to make 1 single crochet. And I'm just inserting into that top loop only. And in each chain, you're just going to make 1 single crochet all the way down this row. Now in this very last chain right here, you're just going to start that single crochet. So insert your hook into the chain, yarn over and pull through just the chain, and then with 2 loops on your hook, you're going to drop your working yarn and pick up whichever color you want to do next. So for me, that's going to be this white. You are going to wrap it around your hook like so, and then just pull it through the last 2 loops. All right, so now we have completed that very last stitch. So after this, we're going to chain up 1, flip our work, and then in that very first stitch, you're going to make 1 single crochet. So insert and 1 single crochet. And none of these chain 1s at the beginning of the rows are going to count as a stitch. I'm also just going to bring up this little tail right here to weave it in. Now in each stitch, we're just going to make 1 single crochet all the way down this row. And as you can see, I'm also not bringing up the working yarn right here. I'm just going to leave it be. Now, once you've come to the very last stitch in the row, you are going to change color, which means you're not going to complete the stitch. So we'll insert our hook into that very last stitch, yarn over, pull through the stitch, and then with 2 loops on your hook, you're going to drop your working yarn and pick up your 3rd color. Then just grab it with your hook and pull through the last 2 loops to finish up the stitch. Okay, so now on to row 3. We're just going to repeat exactly what we did with row 2. So we'll chain up 1, oops, keep our hook on, flip our work, and then we're going to make 1 single crochet in each stitch all the way down, starting in the very first stitch, because again, this chain 1 does not count as a stitch. And as you can see, I'm also weaving in that little tail end as well, and we're not going to bring up the non-working yarn with us. So just 1 single crochet in each stitch all the way down this row until you reach that very last stitch. And now we're at the very last stitch, which means it's time to change color. So we will start that single crochet, drop our working yarn, and then we're going to pick up this yarn that's attached at this end right here. So I'm going to pick up this light brown. And I'm just going to yarn over and pull through those last 2 loops on my hook to complete the stitch. As you can see, we're going to pull or bring up our yarn just like so. So it's going to kind of come up on the end right here. And we're just going to let this little dark brown hang. And now to start row 4, we'll chain up 1, flip our work, and make 1 single crochet in each stitch all the way down. This is a pretty simple pattern. As you can see, we're really just making single crochets throughout this whole project, but I just want to show you guys how I am changing the yarn every time. So you can see that's what it's going to look like when the yarn changes. And now we are at the last stitch again, which means it is time to change color. So we'll insert our hook, yarn over, pull through, and then with 2 loops on your hook, you'll drop that working yarn, pick up the yarn that's hanging off of this end. For me, that is the white yarn. Then you'll yarn over, pull through those last 2 loops and complete the stitch. Now, a quick tip that I have for you guys is when you're changing yarn, you want to make sure that you're not grabbing the yarn down at the base over here. So you see how when you grab it down low by the base of the yarn and pull it through those 2 loops, the rows kind of start bunching together, and it's going to make a not so very pretty project for you guys. So what I recommend is when you change color to pretty much grab the yarn at the same height as where your hook head is. So you just kind of grab it right there, yarn over, and then pull through those last 2 loops. And then you'll have a nice straight line, which means no bunching of your rows. So now that we have that out of the way, moving on to row 5, we'll chain 1, not drop our hook, flip our work, and then in every single stitch, we're just going to make 1 single crochet, just like we've been doing. And make sure to just leave this yarn hang over here. We're never carrying any yarn across our rows in this project. So just keep making 1 single crochet in each stitch all the way down this row until you reach that very last stitch. All right, in that last stitch, we're gonna change color like we've been doing. So we'll drop that working yarn. Then you'll pick up the yarn that's hanging off of this end right here, which for me is that dark brown. Then you'll yarn over, pull through those 2 loops, and row 5 will now officially be done. So this is the pattern that we're working with throughout the whole of the front panel, back panel, same thing. We're just going to be repeating rows of single crochet, alternating colors in every single row until we reach something that looks like this rectangle. Now, you want this rectangle to be your measurement 2 minus 4.5 inches. So for me, my measurement 2 is 19 inches long. Minus 4.5 inches is going to be 14.5 inches long for this rectangle part. So You can see it's just about 14.5 inches long. The reason why we're subtracting 4.5 inches from measurement 2 is because we're going to have 2 inches allotted down here for the ribbing, and then we're going to have 2.5 inches allotted up here for our little shoulder parts. So once you have completed this rectangle, come on back and I'll show you how to get started on these shoulders. Now, once you reach this last stitch, you're still going to change color. So we'll drop that yarn, pick up the non-working yarn, then yarn over both those last 2 stitches. All right, so I'm just going to drop this for a moment. So now we're officially done with the whole rectangle part of the panel. Now, before we start the shoulders, we first need to know about how wide we want the neck hole to be. For me, I'm going to make mine about 6 inches wide. So I'll take my tape measure, place it against my project, and count over how many stitches 6 inches is worth. So for me, that's about 20 stitches. Then what I'm going to do is count the number of stitches in that very top row, which for me is 60 stitches. So then what I'll do is I will take the number of stitches in that top row and subtract it from the allocated number of stitches for my neck hole. So for me, that will be 60 minus 20. To equal 40 stitches. Now I'm going to take those 40 stitches and then divide them by 2 to get 20 stitches. And that 20 stitch, or those 20 stitches, are going to be the base of each of my shoulder parts. So shoulder 1 will be 20 stitches wide at the base, and shoulder 2 will be 20 stitches wide at the base. So I just placed stitch markers in the 20th stitch over here and the 20th stitch over here. So that'll just be easier for you guys to see what I'm doing. So with your hook still on your project from where we last started, we'll chain up 1, flip our work, and then I'm going to make 1 single crochet in each stitch until I reach this first stitch marker right here. So until I have a total of 20 stitches. Now once we've reached that stitch marker, which is my 20th stitch, I'm just going to take it out, and in that very last stitch I'll insert my hook, yarn over, pull through, and then I'm going to leave the 2 loops on my hook because now we are going to change color yet again. So I'll drop that yarn, and as you can see in my pattern, the next color is going to be that dark brown, which is actually over here on this side of the little panel. So what I did was I cut this yarn off, and I'm going to grab another little ball of yarn to change color. So I'll grab the other yarn with my hook like this, and then pull it through those last 2 loops. Oops. All right, kind of pull that tight. And now what we're going to do for this row 2 is we'll chain up 1, flip our work, and we're going to start decreasing on the inside of the panel. So that means in the first 2 stitches, I'm going to make a decreasing single crochet. So I'll insert my hook into the first stitch, I'll yarn over, pull through. Now with 2 loops on the hook, I'm going to insert my hook into the following stitch, yarn over, pull through, and now with 3 loops on my hook, I'm going to yarn over and pull through all 3 stitches. All right, so I'm going to now place 1 single crochet in each of the following stitches all the way down the row until I reach that very last stitch where we are going to change color yet again. All right, in that last stitch, we are going to change colors. So I'm going to drop the yarn I'm working with, pick up the yarn that's already attached to this side of the project. Then I'll just yarn over, pull through like we've been doing. And now for row 3, we'll chain 1, flip our work. Again, just leave this yarn, the dark brown yarn, alone. We're not taking it with us. And in each stitch all the way down until we reach the very last stitch, we're going to make 1 single crochet in each stitch. All right, and in that very last stitch, we're going to change color. So I'll drop the yarn I'm working with and pick up the color that's over on this end, which is the white. Then I'm going to yarn over, pull through those 2 loops. I'll chain 1, flip my work, flip it this way. And now for row 4, we're going to start with a decreasing single crochet in the first 2 stitches and then normal single crochets all the way down. So I'll insert my hook into that first stitch, yarn over, pull through. Then I'll insert my hook into the following stitch, yarn over, pull through. And with 3 loops on my hook, I'm going to yarn over, pull through all 3. All right, and then we will just make 1 single crochet in each stitch all the way down until we reach that very last stitch of the row. Okay, in that very last stitch, we are going to change color, so we'll drop the working yarn, pick up the yarn that's hanging off this end, which is the dark brown, yarn over, pull through, chain up 1, flip our work, and now in row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're going to place 1 single crochet in each stitch all the way down the row until we reach the very last stitch. Okay, in the last stitch, we're going to change color. So pick up the yarn that's over on this end, yarn over, pull through. Then you're going to chain 1, flip your work, and you're going to continue to repeat rows 2 and 3 until you reach a total of 10 rows in this shoulder. Okay, so in the very last stitch on this shoulder, you're going to complete your single crochet like normal. You'll chain 1, cut your work, and then pull that through. All right, and then both of the other colors of yarn you're also going to want to cut as well. I left a little bit of an end on each one just in case I needed to weave that in later. So what you're going to do is we're pretty much just going to mirror what we did over here over on this side of our panel. So let's bring it in closer and get started on the second shoulder. The first thing you'll want to do is make sure that you're working with the same color that you started your first shoulder on. So for me, that was white. You're gonna make a slip knot, pop your hook on there, and then we're going to insert our hook into the very first stitch all the way over on the right hand side. So I'll insert the hook like so, and then I'm just gonna yarn over, pull through, chain up 1, and then we're going to work this in the same way. So we're going to make 1 single crochet in each of these stitches all the way until we reach that little bobby pin, stitch mark, or whatever you want to call it. So we're going to start in that very first stitch with 1 single crochet. In the next stitch, we'll place another single crochet and just keep doing this until you've reached the other stitch marker. All right, we've reached the stitch marker, so I'll take that out and we will start making a single crochet in that last stitch, which for me is the 20th stitch. But we won't finish it because now we're going to change color yet again. So again, make sure you're working in with the same color scheme over on this other shoulder as well. So for me, the next color is my dark brown. I'll grab it with my hook, pull it through those last 2 loops. Oops. Chain 1. Flip my work, and then in the first 2 stitches we're going to make a decreasing single crochet. So let me get this all fixed up. All right, yeah, first 2 stitches will make the decreasing single crochet, which is row 2. So yarn over, pull through the first stitch, insert your hook in the next stitch, yarn over, pull through, and with 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through all 3. Then we're going to make 1 single crochet in each stitch all the way down until we reach that very last stitch. Now that we've reached that very last stitch, we won't complete the single crochet, but rather we will grab our 3rd color yarn, put it in our hook like so, and then pull through those last 2 loops on the hook. Then you'll chain up 1, flip your work, And you're just going to continue repeating the pattern that we did on the first shoulder over on this second shoulder. So once you're done with that, come on back and I will show you, I guess, what we're doing next. Okay, so I just finished up the second shoulder, so now my first panel is done. And hopefully yours is too. So now you're going to move on to doing the second panel. And the second panel simply is just this exact same thing all over again. So just repeat all of the steps that I showed you for this first panel for your second panel. So once you have two panels, two panels in total, just like this, come on back and I'll show you how to seam up these shoulders. To get started on the seam, you're first going to place both of your panels on top of each other like so that you're lining up both of these rows for the top of the shoulder. Then grab whatever color yarn you prefer, make a slip knot and pop that on your hook. So what we're going to be doing is making slip stitches in each of these stitches all the way down both of these rows. We'll pick up the front loop only of each stitch on the front panel and the back loop only on the back panel. So we'll first insert our hook into that very first stitch on the front panel, and we're going to insert this into the front loop only. Okay, so you see I'm just picking up that front loop, and then we'll find the corresponding stitch on the back panel and just pick up only the back loop of that stitch. So just the back loop. All right, and then we're going to slip stitch all of that together, making sure to also pull through the slip knot. All right, and then we're just going to make one slip stitch in the front loop only of the front panel and the back loop only of the back panel all the way down this row. So we'll go right into the next stitch. Oops. I'm going to pick up the front loop only. Then we'll find the corresponding stitch on the back panel and pick up the back loop only. And then slip stitch. So you're going to just do this in every single stitch down the row. And then in that very last stitch, you're going to do the exact same thing. So just picking up the front loop only on the front panel and the back loop only on the back panel. Then you'll just slip stitch that, chain up one, grab some scissors and cut your yarn, leaving a bit of a tail. Then just pull that right on through. And you guys can double knot this if you'd like it to be a little bit more secure. But that is what the shoulder seam is going to end up looking like. All right, these two shoulders are seamed together, so now it's time to get started on the sleeves. And this is what our sleeve is going to look like. So before we get started on this, you're going to need to take two measurements. The first measurement will be your wrist measurement, and the second will be your arm length. So this is what I mean when I say wrist measurement. Just grab a tape measure, wrap it around your wrist, and see what it says. For me, that's about 6 inches. And when I say arm length, I'm talking about the top of your shoulder, where your shoulder seam would normally be on a shirt, all the way down to your wrist, right about here. So we're going to first start down here at the ribbing. And I want my ribbing to be about 2 inches long. You guys can make this however, long or short you want to, but I'm just going to go with about 2 inches. So grab whatever color you want all of your ribbing to be, make a slip knot and pop that on your hook. So for me, to make my ribbing 2 inches long, I'm going to chain up a total of 9. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now I'm just going to make one single crochet starting in the second chain from the hook and all the way down. And I'm just going to insert into that top loop only. Again, you guys can insert into the back bump if you'd like, but it's just too annoying for me. We're just going to make one single crochet in each chain all the way down. So once you're done with row 1, you should have a total of 8 single crochets. For row 2, you're going to chain up 1, flip your work, and we're going to work 1 single crochet into the back loop only of each stitch. Again, this chain 1 is not going to count as a stitch, so we're going to start in that very first stitch right here. So you'll insert your hook into the back loop only. All right, so just picking up that 1 loop, and you'll yarn over, pull through, and with 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through both 2. All right, so we're going to do that in each stitch all the way down. Once you reach that very last stitch, instead of going into just the back loop only, you're going to go through the whole entire stitch. So you'll pick up both the front and the back loops, and then just complete like a normal single crochet. All right, so for row 3, you'll chain up 1, flip your work, and we're just going to repeat row 2, which means we're going to insert our hook into the back loop only of that first stitch and make a single crochet. And we'll make 1 single crochet all the way down this row, but in that very last stitch, instead of going through just the back loop only, we're going to go through the whole entire stitch. Okay, so we've reached that very last stitch, which means we're going to go through the entire stitch. All right, we pick up the front and back loops. So you're just going to repeat row 2 until you reach your wrist measurement. So I made 24 rows of this ribbing, and that was just about 6 inches long, which was my wrist measurement. So now moving on to the rest of this sleeve, you're going to keep your hook on your work just where it was. You'll chain up 1, and now we're going to be working along this top edge right here. We'll place 1 single crochet in each single crochet space all the way down. So for me, that means I should have 24 single crochets at the end of this row. So I'll insert into the first single crochet space I see, which is right here. And then I'll insert into the second single crochet space, which is right here. And as you can see, this is just pretty much the top of every single row, right? So we'll go into the next space. And I'm just gonna keep making 1 single crochet in each single crochet space all the way down. Now in this last single crochet space, I would normally place my single crochet in this space right here, but because it's the very last row, I'm actually going to place my last single crochet in the chain space, and that way it's just going to make this look a little straighter. So I'm not going to finish this stitch, I'm just going to leave my 2 loops on the hook because in the next row we're going to change color. But as you can see for row 1, I have 24 stitches, which is equal to my 24 rows of ribbing. So your piece should have the same amount of stitches in the first row as the number of rows you made for your ribbing. Now before I get into the increasing rows, I actually already made my 2 increasing rows right here, just so I can show you what this is going to turn into. So I only made 2 increasing rows on, both this sleeve that we're working on and also on the sleeve that is already done. So if I lay this out flat and I kind of, do my tape measure like so, it's about 10 inches long after we're done with all of our increases, which for me was only 2 rows. But you can see on the sleeve that I've completed over here, which also only has 2 rows of increases, it tends to balloon quite a bit. So at the very end of the sleeve, it ended up being about 16 inches wide. But as you can see right here, at the end of the last increase, the only 2 increasing rows, it was only 10 inches wide. So your your sleeve is going to balloon out quite a bit. For me, it ended up being about 6 inches more. So just keep that in mind. You know, if you see after you've done your 2 increases that it still looks really small, it's going to grow quite a bit. So yeah, just wanted to show you guys that. Let's get right into teaching you how to make these increases. So starting where we left off, it's time to change color and start our increasing rows. So in that very last stitch on row 1, you are going to change color. Make sure that you're changing color according to your front and back panels, making sure the scheme is the same. I mean, if you want to, you don't have to, but that's what I'm doing. So once you have your color changed, you're going to chain up 1, flip your work, and we're now going to make this our first increasing row. So I am going to make 1 single crochet in the first stitch and then 2 single crochets in the second stitch, and we're going to alternate that all the way down this row. So starting in the very first stitch, I'm going to insert my hook and make 1 single crochet. And as you can see, I am also weaving in this little tail as well. Now in the second stitch, we're going to make 2 single crochets. So 1 and 2. Now in the third stitch, we're going to make 1 single crochet. And in the fourth stitch, we're making 2 single crochets. So as you see, we're just repeating the pattern of 1 single crochet in the first stitch and 2 single crochets in the following stitch. So continue doing this all the way down row 2 until you reach that very last stitch. Now for me, I'm ending this row with 2 single crochets in the last stitch. It may be different for you. So I'll insert, make 1 stitch, and then in the very last stitch that I make and that you make, we are not going to finish the stitch because we are changing color yet again. So grab your next color and pull through those 2 loops. Now we're going to chain 1, flip our work, and for row 3, we're going to do the exact same thing we did for row 2. So this will be another row of increases. Now again, we're making sure that we're not carrying either of these yarns, we're just leaving them hang. So in that very first stitch, we're going to make 1 single crochet. And in the next stitch, we're going to make 2 single crochets. So 1 and 2. And I am also weaving in this little tail end though. Now in the third stitch, we'll make 1 single crochet. And in the fourth stitch, we'll make 2 single crochets. So again, we are just repeating the exact same thing we did for row 2 on row 3. Now for your very last stitch, you are not going to finish it. You'll drop your working yarn, pick up the non-working yarn that's hanging off of this end, and then complete the stitch. All right, so then we will chain 1 and flip our work for row 4. So this is going to be the end of my increasing rows. I only made 2, and in this very last row, I have a total of 54 stitches. So if you guys want to make your sleeve larger, then I would recommend making 1 more row of increases like this. Now I also had a bit of an epiphany. So you know how I was telling you how this is still going to grow for me about 6 inches? I figured out that I can kind of tell how large that this will grow depending on the last row of increases. So I had 54 stitches in that last row, right? Now I took the panels that I already made, I counted out 54 stitches, and then I just simply measured about how long those 54 stitches were. So as you can see, it's just about 16 inches, and that is what this sleeve also turned out to be. So that's one way that you can tell how long your sleeve, or I'm sorry, how wide your sleeve is going to be without having to complete the whole sleeve and then realize it's too big or too small, you know. So that's just a little trick. But moving on to row 4, this is where we are going to start just doing normal rows of single crochet. So as you can see, I've already done the chain 1, and now we're just going to place 1 single crochet in each stitch all the way down this row, starting in that very first stitch. And in that last stitch, we're going to change color. So we won't complete the stitch, but we will drop our working yarn and pick up the yarn that's hanging off of this end, which is my light brown. And I'll yarn over both of those last 2 loops, chain 1, and flip my work. And all we're going to do is continue making rows of this normal single crochet. So just 1 single crochet in each stitch all the way down. Alright, so that's what we're going to be doing for the rest of this sleeve. So just continue making rows of normal single crochet, alternating color on every single row until you reach your arm length measurement. Now in that very last stitch, you're going to complete the single crochet like normal, chain up 1, cut your work, leaving a bit of a tail, then you're just going to pull that right on through. Alright, and you're also going to cut off the ends of both the other colors of yarn. So this is what your completed sleeve should look like. I've obviously folded it in half. I did a total of 61 rows. This is including the increasing rows and also that very first row at the very bottom where we did our ribbing. So as you can see, this sleeve is just about 17 inches long, which was my arm measurement, and that includes the ribbing down below. So once you have your first sleeve completed, all you're going to do for your second sleeve is repeat every single step that I just showed you here. So once you're done with both of your sleeves, come on back and we'll start seaming this sweater together. Yay. So I'm just going to give a really quick overview of how we're going to seam everything together. So first you are going to get your panels looking something like this, and with your little sleeves here, we're going to open them up and put them at the ends of the sweater or of the panels, just like so. So it's going to look something similar to this. So the first thing that we're going to do is seam up both of these sleeves to the panels. So that's what we're going to focus on first. So let me bring you guys in closer and show you how we're going to do that. Now before we join these two pieces together, the first thing I want you to do is take your sleeve, count the number of stitches in that top row and divide it by 2. So for me, I had 54 stitches divided by 2, which is 27 stitches. Then I want you to take that number, starting at the right hand side of your sleeve. I want you to count over that number of stitches and then place a bobby pin or stitch marker in that stitch. So for me, I just counted over 27 stitches and placed my bobby pin in the 27th stitch. The reason we're doing this is so that we can find out where the middle of our sleeve is. So we want this middle of the sleeve to line up with the seam on our panels, right? So I'll just kind of put this over in the seam over there so we know where the middle is. Now what you want to do is just lay this out flat, and you can kind of see where the ends of your sleeves are hitting on both sides of the panels. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to count over the number of rows to where, you know, this edge meets this panel. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's about 30 rows on this side of the panel, and I want to mirror that on the other side of the panel. So we can just check as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that seems to be about even. Now I'm going to zoom in over here, and we're going to attach the yarn and start sewing all of this together. So obviously the number of stitches on the first half of your sleeve and the number of rows on the first half of your panel are not going to be exactly the same. So for example, from my little bobby pin down, I have 27 stitches on the first half of my sleeve, and from the panel seam down, I count over 30 rows, and that's where these two meet. So that means I'm going to have to skip 3 rows in between where I start my seam up until I reach the middle where this panel seam hits. So that means for you, say you have 30 stitches and your panel and your sleeve meet at 35 rows, you're gonna have to skip 5 rows from where you begin your seam up until where you reach the middle of your sleeve and the middle of your panel. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's just get right on to sewing this up, and yeah. You'll need a darning needle and a piece of yarn that is 3 times the length of your seam. So once you've got all of that, just place your yarn in the eye of your needle, and as you can see, I've just put a little bobby pin right here. This is the first row that I'm going to start in. So I'm going to take my darning needle, place it throughout the whole stitch, then we'll just take this little bobby pin out. So this is my 30th row right here. I'm going to insert my hook into this stitch, but also making sure to pick up the yarn that we carried over. So make sure that that is on top of your darning needle, and the reason for that is so we are not going to see the little carried yarns on the outside of our sweater. So just make sure that you're picking that up as well. Insert into the first row. And with this, we are just going to make a knot first. So you can tie it in a regular knot, double knot, triple knot, whatever you want. Once you've re-thread your needle, it's time to actually start sewing. So I'll pick this up and I'm going to insert my hook into the second stitch and just pick up that front loop only. And then we want to insert into this next row right here. Also making sure to pick up the yarn that we carried over, okay? So make sure that is going on top of your needle, and we'll insert that in and then pull right on through. Okay, so that's the way that we are going to be sewing this together. So now I'm going to insert my needle through the front loop only of the next stitch. So we're kind of just like stitching it up around and around and around. So I'll insert here. Again, I'll insert into the next row over, making sure to pick up the yarn that we carried over, make sure it's on top of my darning needle, then insert into that row and pull right on through. All right, so I'm gonna skip my first row. Remember I said I have to skip 3 rows before I hit the middle of the panel in the middle of the sleeve. So I'm gonna insert my hook into the next stitch, front loop only, and we just went through this white row. So I'm gonna skip this dark brown row and go into this light brown row. So I'm skipping 1 row. Again, making sure to pick up the yarn that was carried over as well. Insert, okay, then I'll just pull that right on through, and that's all we're going to be doing until we reach the middle seam on the panels. So I'm going to skip 1 stitch at the beginning, 1 stitch in the middle, and 1 stitch at the very end of this part of the seam right here. So just continue to sew this like I've been showing you, and I'll meet you guys back at the middle. All right, I'm at that very last stitch right here, so I'm taking my little bobby pin out, and by this point you should be at the very top where the seam of your panels are. So I'm just going to complete that. All right, Okay, so now we're moving on to the second half of the sleeve, which is really just the exact same thing as the first half. Again, I'm skipping 3 rows on this side as well, but I just wanted to show you all that we are going to skip right on over this seam. So you're going to go into that very next stitch of yours, and then you're just going to insert it into the first row on the other side of the seam. So we'll just go like this, okay? Pull that tight, and then you're ready to go for the second half. So just continue to do exactly what you did on the first half over here, and I will meet you guys back at the very end. All right, and we are at the very last stitch. Okay, so in the very last stitch, instead of pulling it all the way through, you're gonna leave like a little loop, and then you'll put your darning needle through the middle of the loop like this, pull it tight, and that's going to make a little knot. So you can knot this 2 or 3 times as well for it to be extra secure. But that is the finished first shoulder seam. So all you're gonna do is do the exact same thing on the opposite sleeve. And once you're done with that, come on back and I'll show you how to seam up the rest of the top. So now you should be done sewing both of these sweater sleeves to the panels. So what I've done here is I've folded the sweater in half, making sure that the seams are still on the outside of the sweater. And now we're going to finish sewing up the rest of the sweater. So we'll start down here, we'll seam up this side, and then we'll seam all the way down the arm to the very tip of the sleeve. So that's what we're going to be working on next. We'll be sewing up this seam in the exact same way we sewed on the shoulders, so in the same fashion. Now I'm starting at the very corner of the bottom of the sweater, so this is a sleeve over here. We're going to be starting at the bottom corner of the sleeve, and you want to make sure that you're working from right to left. So what I did was I took my darning needle. Again, I cut a piece of yarn that was 3 times the length of the seam that I'm sewing, and we're going to attach the yarn in the very first corner row, just in the same way we did on the sleeve. So we'll just insert all throughout that row, so you can see what I'm picking up here. And then I'll find the corresponding row on the back panel, insert, and then I'm just going to make a knot, but I would recommend you guys make a double or triple knot so that it's extra secure. Now that I've rethread my needle, it's time to actually start sewing. So we're going to be making a stitch in each row on the front panel and the back panel, so there'll be no skipping going on. So starting in the second row, I'm going to insert into that space. And again, just like on the shoulder seam, we want to make sure that we are picking up these carried pieces of yarn both on the front panel and the back panel, so that they're not going to show through on the front side of the sweater when you flip it inside out. So okay, I inserted my needle into that first row, and I'll find the corresponding row on the back panel, which is this brown, this dark brown. So again, making sure that I'm picking up that carried yarn, I'm going to insert my hook into the second row, and I'm just going to pull that all the way through. And this may take a little while because this piece of yarn is going to be a bit long. So we'll just leave that be. All right, so now we're going to go move on to the third row. So 1, 2, 3. You'll insert your hook going from the front to back. So insert your hook into that row, and then insert your hook into the corresponding row on the back panel, which is this light brown right here. Again, making sure to pick up any carried yarn as well. Okay, and you'll just pull that right on through, and you're going to continue to do this all the way until you reach this join right here. So I just finished stitching up the sides of the panels, and as you can see, I've reached the point where the sleeve meets our panels. So what I'm gonna do is we'll turn the project. Blah. My bad. So much project to turn now. So we're just going to turn the project so that we're working with the sleeve from right to left, and you're just going to continue doing the exact same thing. So we'll just make one stitch in each row all the way down. So start in the join right here, going from front to back, and again making sure to pick up any carried pieces of yarn as well. Now we've just reached the rib part of the sleeve. So as you can see, in the front of our sleeve we have chains, and on the back part of the sleeve we have the stitches. And it may be flip-flop for you, because I know on my other sleeve the stitches were in the front of the sleeve and the chains were in the back. But you'll work this in the same way. So we'll go into the very first chain, and we're just going to pick up that front loop only. So again, if you have stitches in this front of your rib, you're still just going to pick up the front loop only of the stitch. And then in the back part of our ribbing, we're going to pick up the back loop only of the stitch. And then you're just gonna pull it right on through. So you'll continue to do that in every stitch and chain all the way down. So, okay, we'll find the next one. And you're just gonna go from front to back like we've been doing. Right, back loop only of the stitch, and then just sew it right on up. So continue doing this all the way down till you get to the very end of the rib. So we've reached the very last stitch, and I'm going to insert my needle into the hole of the chain and the hole of the stitch to finish this off. Okay, and you're not going to pull this all the way through. You're going to leave a little bit of a loop, right? Then you'll put your needle through the loop and then pull that tight. And again, I would knot this several times to make sure it's super secure. So once you're done with that, you can cut off your tail end, but as you can see, I'll just weave this in. And once you're done with this first side, repeat all of these steps over on the other side, and we'll finally have the sweater all seamed up. So now that everything is all seamed up, the only thing we have left to do is make the ribbing on the bottom of the sweater as well as the neck. So let's get started working on the neck first. To get started with the neck, you're going to want to make a slip knot in the color of your choice. I'm just going to make it in the same color as the ribs on my sleeves. And we're going to insert our hook into the corner stitch of the neck. All right, so you're just going to yarn over and pull through that slip knot and chain up one. So for the first round of the neck, we're just going to skip every other stitch and make a single crochet in every other stitch. So in that very first stitch, I will make one single crochet because our chain ones do not count as a stitch. Then I'm going to skip this next stitch and make a single crochet in the third stitch. Right. Skip the next stitch, make a single crochet in the third stitch. This is just going to round out the neck a little bit. So now that I've reached this first shoulder over here, we are still going to skip every other row. So first I'll skip that last stitch and I'll make one single crochet in the first row right here. Then I'm going to skip this second row and make one single crochet in the following row. Again, I'm going to skip this next row, make one single crochet in the following row. And that's all we're doing all the way around this neck. So we're just going to skip every other stitch, and then once we reach the rows, we're going to skip every other row and put one single crochet in there. So now that I've reached the beginning of this round, I'm going to skip this last row and make a slip stitch into the very first single crochet. Okay, cool. And this is going to be the end of round 1. So now we're moving right onto the rib. So from here, you're going to chain up 5. And then we're going to work back down along this chain. So starting in the second chain from the hook right here, you're going to make 1 single crochet. And then you're just going to make 1 single crochet in each chain all the way down. Okay, so that at the end of our little row 1, you should have 4 single crochets. Now to attach this row to the neck hole, we are going to make a slip stitch into the next stitch of round 1. So I'm going to insert into here, picking up that whole stitch, and then just make a slip stitch. Now I'm going to chain up 1, flip my little work, which is just this little guy right here, and we're going to work into the back loop only of each single crochet until we reach this very last stitch. So this is our first stitch right here. Make sure that you are counting 4 stitches all the way down, because you can kind of see right here, this looks like the first stitch, but trust me, it isn't. So this will be our first stitch right here. Now I'm going to insert my hook into the back loop only and make 1 single crochet. Okay, I'll do that in the second stitch and also in the third stitch. Now again, we've reached the last stitch right here, so I'm actually going to insert my hook into the whole stitch, picking up the front and back loop, and then just make a single crochet. Now for row 3, you'll chain up 1, flip your work again, and you're going to make 1 single crochet in the back loop only of each stitch, starting with this very first stitch right here. So we'll insert into the back loop only and make a single crochet. Okay, so once you're done with row 3, we are now back at that neck hole again, which means I'm going to slip stitch into this very next stitch of round 1. So I'll insert into here, make a slip stitch, chain 1, and then just continue repeating rows 2 and 3 all the way around the neck hole until you reach the beginning right over here. So I'll meet you back once you guys are done. So I just got back to the very beginning of our ribbing, and it's time to slip stitch these 2 rows together. So you want to make sure that you are at the top of the ribbing, so you want to make sure your hook's right up here. And we're going to start by slip stitching these 2 together like so. So I'll first chain up 1, and then I'm going to insert my hook into the front loop only of this stitch, and then I'm going to insert into the very first chain right here on this row. So we'll insert into the first chain. Okay, and then we're just going to slip stitch that all together. All right, now going into the second stitch, we're going to insert into the front loop only, and then find the corresponding chain on this other row right here. Okay, we'll go into that third stitch, front loop only, find the third chain, and then that very last stitch, the fourth stitch, front loop only, then we'll find the fourth chain and slip stitch. Okay, now I'm also going to slip stitch down below here, just kind of in these 2 stitches. I'm not really going into anything specific. I'm just going to make 1 more slip stitch just in some random spaces. And then once I'm all the way down there at the very end, I'm going to chain up 1, grab my scissors, cut off a tail, and then pull that through. and you can, you know, double knot that, triple knot that, do whatever you want. So that is going to be the end of the neck ribbing. So now the only thing that we have left to do is the bottom ribbing down below. Now moving on to the bottom of the sweater, we're going to make the ribbing in the same way that we made the neck ribbing. So you're going to take that same color yarn and make a slip knot and pop it on your hook. Then I'm going to start over in the right hand seam. So I'm going to insert my hook into this stitch right here. It doesn't really matter which stitch you start this in, but I just prefer starting it by the seam. And I'm just going to pull that through, chain up 1, and for round 1 we're going to work 1 single crochet in every other stitch all the way around the bottom of the sweater. So again, that chain 1 does not count as a stitch, so I'm going to put 1 single crochet in the very first stitch. Then I'm going to skip the next stitch and put a single crochet in the following stitch. Okay, again I'll skip the next stitch, put a single crochet in the following stitch, and I'm going to continue to do that all the way around the bottom of this sweater until I reach the very beginning over here. So now I'm back at the beginning of the round, and I'm just going to slip stitch into that very first single crochet to finish this up. So that is going to be the first round of our bottom rib. Now I would recommend trying on your sweater before you get started with the ribbing, just to make sure that this still fits you comfortably. If it doesn't, then I would just recommend making 1 single crochet in each of your stitches all the way around. But once you are done with that, we're going to move right on to the ribbing, which will be pretty much exactly the same as the neck ribbing. So the first thing we're going to do is chain up 9. So 1, 2, 9. All right, now we're going to work back down along this chain, starting in the second chain from the hook with 1 single crochet in each chain. So now you should have 8 single crochets in this first row here. So we'll connect this to the sweater by slip stitching into the second stitch on round 1. Okay, then we'll chain 1, flip our work, and work in the back loop only of all of these single crochets except for that very last stitch. So again, make 1 single crochet in the back loop only. And then in that very last stitch, we're going to insert our hook into the whole stitch, picking up the front and back loops. Then we'll single crochet, chain 1, flip our work, and work a single crochet into the back loop only of every single stitch, starting with that very first stitch. Okay, now that we are back down to the round, we are going to slip stitch into the next stitch of round 1. Okay, so you're just going to repeat rows 2 and 3 all the way around the bottom of the sweater until we get back to the very beginning of this ribbing. So I'll meet you back at the beginning. So I'm back at the beginning here, and this is going to work the exact same way as our neck ribbing. So you want to make sure that you are at the top of your ribbing right here. I've already chained up 1, and we're just going to slip stitch both of these rows together. So again, we will go into that very first stitch and pick up the front loop only, and then we'll find that corresponding chain on the second row here, and we'll just make a slip stitch. Okay, so you're going to continue doing this all the way down the row. Okay, inserting into the front loop only of the stitch, and then finding the corresponding chain on the second row and just slip stitching it together. So once you've finished up that, I'm going to do the same thing I did on the neck. So I'm just going to go kind of below the rib, find a few random spaces, make 1 last slip stitch. Then I'm going to chain up 1, find my scissors, cut off a tail and then pull that on through. Again, I would double or triple knot this to make sure it's super secure. So once you are done with that, the bottom ribbing should now be complete. Now the only thing you have left to do is weave in all of your ends and your sweater will officially be done. Now after you've woven in all your ends, this is what your sweater should look like and it should be officially done. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, just post them down below and I will get back to you. And yeah, that's going to be it for this video. So you guys have a great day and I will see you in one of my next videos. Bye.